Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Death Space Filling the Void. Fireworks still going off here in Charleston, South Carolina from the 4th. Whew, I certainly delayed recording this. I'm recording the introduction here on Tuesday, the 6th, which will give me a little bit of time to put the whole episode together for Thursday. But I'm feeling the choices of the weekend, of the long weekend. Jamie and I had an incredible weekend. We went to Sullivan's Island, which is a beach here in Charleston. I also learned that Charleston is ranked number 3 in the U.S. in terms of shark attacks. Doesn't make you feel good, even though the odds are 1 in 783 million. Yes, I looked that up and memorized it. And I'll definitely be recalling that information when I go swimming. Because I'm not going to not go swimming. Come on. I feel like LL Cool J and Deep Blue Sea taught us everything we need to know about shark attacks. You go for the eye. Done. Just that easy. We also laid by the pool and we went to see some fireworks. And seemingly everyone has fireworks in South Carolina. But yeah, feeling it. You know, just one of those things you got to push through, make it happen, get things done, and then get to bed immediately. Need a little sleep and a little less alcohol in the system, and we'll be right as rain. Oh, I also forgot to mention, cooked up some gator. Had to give it a shot. Turned out delicious. I did one with a Cajun rub and kind of pan-seared it in olive oil in a cast iron pan. With the other one, I made it in... I caramelized some garlic and white onion in some butter and add the gator in with a little bit of white wine, and ooh, it's very good. I'm certainly on the more adventurous side when it comes to eating, but I think most people would enjoy it. It didn't taste like swamp meat, which is something I feel like people are afraid of when it comes to gators, but it had a little something in there that made you know that it wasn't chicken. You know, it was kind of like chicken, except there was something else in there. I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's water or the fact that it's very lean and it's a bit muscular. But anyway, would recommend trying to cook some gator. It's nice to have some different choices and try some new stuff. All right, we've got a great interview lined up for today. I spoke with Laura A. Sussman, who's the owner and a licensed funeral director from Kraft Sussman Funeral and Cremation Services out in Nevada. I don't know if I'm supposed to say Nevada or Nevada, but I'll just acknowledge. I'll say both, and my instinct is to say Nevada. Nevada sounds like I'm trying too hard to say that, so that can't be right. Laura and I had a great conversation about a few things. Natural burials, so different options that you can have for religious reasons or wanting to have a smaller carbon footprint with what happens to your body, different kinds of cremation, including aquamation, which I had never heard of, which is instead of being burned in cremation, with flame, it's done with water. That sounds a lot nicer to me. I don't like the idea of being burned. Water's just water. We're mostly water as it is. We also talked about the experience of funeral homes and what her and her partner try to do differently. Everything from the fact that some funeral homes pay their employees on commissions, so they're trying to upsell you, and how her funeral home doesn't do that. Her employees actually get bonuses for times they get a 5-star review on Google. How her funeral home has dogs there, if the family's open to allowing the dogs, and just how her funeral home is decorated a little bit differently, and the access that she allows family members. I feel like a lot of us don't really think about funeral and wake traditions and what we'd like to do differently. So it's really interesting to actually consider ways that things can be a little bit different and how that could be beneficial for people who are grieving. To not feel as though you're going through the motions, that you're an active participant. And I think that could be really helpful with the grieving process. Well, I'm very excited to get to the interview. Just want to remind you to, if you're liking the show, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever platform you're using. And also to check the show out, Death Space Filling the Void, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the interview with Laura Sussman.
Joining me now is Laura Sussman, who is a funeral director. What's the name of your funeral home?
It's Kraft Sussman Funeral and Cremation Services.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I'm very excited to be speaking with you today because we're going to be talking about natural burials. And I'm very curious, what is a natural burial?
Well, it's defined differently by different people, but basically it is a burial that is similar to what's happened through the generations and ages, where there's no embalming, that we use biodegradable caskets or shrouds or clothing to wrap the person in, and that the person, the deceased, is placed in the earth in a natural state versus surrounded by metal and concrete and things that don't readily decompose in the earth.
Got it. Okay. The thought process, just so I understand it, being that embalming fluid, is a relatively, in the period of human existence, a newish invention, as opposed to over most of human existence, you would pass away and then kind of go in the ground.
Right. Like in the United States, embalming started in the Civil War era where people could not see their sons who passed away without somebody coming up with embalming to be able to bring them back to wherever they're from. So the body could stay intact, wouldn't decompose, and the family could see their son or brother before burial. So it was a way to help the families to reconnect with their loved one who passed.
Just so I understand, embalming fluid helps the body maintain its appearance. It feels like it is for the loved ones to be able to view.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's made out of formaldehyde, and it displaces the blood in the body, and it preserves the cells. The cells won't break down without oxygen. It also kills any kind of viruses, bacteria. So if somebody had a contagious disease, you could actually see them and do a viewing. But religions that opt for more natural methods of burial, Judaism, Muslim, they really forbid embalming.
Mm.
Formaldehyde also, when it's placed in the soil, leaches into the soil, goes into our water system. So it stays for many years after just the visitation.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't sound like something you want in the water supply.
Right. They do make some, and we started using them years ago. They do make some carcinogen or formaldehyde-free embalming fluids that they don't provide the same effect on contagious diseases, but they do provide a nice appearance for the families. So it's a little easier on the environment and the person using it, the embalmer, to provide a nice appearance, but it's not having the effect on the soil that a formaldehyde-based embalming fluid would.
Got it. I want to ask where natural burial sort of started. You may have answered that a bit with religion, but before we get to that, why do we think, or why do you think it's important for families to see their deceased relatives? I'm sure that's not standard across cultures around the world, but it's something that I feel like here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a bit common, and it's almost like there's a promise that you'll have that moment to say goodbye face to face. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and actually in history, people have always had a chance to see their loved ones because there weren't funeral homes, right? So a person would pass away, they would do a service or a wake at their home, or they would have the deceased at their home until the time of the burial or cremation, depending on the culture. So they always had that opportunity. But once funeral homes came into effect, the deceased was taken to the funeral home. Sometimes family members weren't around at the time of death. They didn't get a chance to see their loved one. So we created those opportunities for visitation. And then obviously with embalming, where you could preserve the body longer, people could come in 2 weeks, 3 weeks later and have a big event, where it used to be before embalming, people would do things in a much more timely manner, a day or two. I mentioned Judaism and Islam. The idea is to bury the body as soon as possible out of the dignity of the deceased
Mhm.
before it decomposes at all. And so those, we try to do that as soon as possible within a day or two.
Mhm.
And the family members, if they're around, they participate. If they're not, if they can't get here in time, we try to do it as quickly as possible. And nowadays we can Zoom a service. People can
Mhm.
participate from wherever they are. With the whole COVID pandemic, obviously, family members can't go into the hospitals. So the only chance they get to see their loved one after a death, or even well, it's after death, but even if they've had a long illness, they haven't seen them in weeks or months, except maybe by a FaceTime or something. They can come into the funeral home and spend some time with them, which is really important for people to make that connection physically with somebody that they've lost.
Yeah, I will share that, the times I've experienced loss, particularly my grandmother's, there was it's really nice to have that moment to look them face to face and feel like you are speaking directly to them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're in your mind, of course, they're in your heart, but that is important, that face to face time.
That's one of the things we do different than a lot of the other mortuaries in Las Vegas, is we always provide time for a family to spend a few minutes with their loved one. First of all, it lets us know that we have the right person. We don't have to take the word of a third party, but that time for them is really important. And often, if it was a horrific death, let's say, they found them at home from a suicide, or it's a coroner case, or they hadn't seen them in the hospital, or they did see them in the hospital, but they had like a breathing tube in or something, to be able to come into the funeral home where it's quiet, there's not a lot of noise around, beeping or sirens or whatever. And they've had their, we call it feature set, where their mouth and eyes are closed. And it's just such a much more peaceful experience than where they may have seen them last, which may have been much more traumatic.
That's such a great point. Hospitals can be so scary, or if there is certainly an incident, it is almost like you're seeing them in they're okay, they're
Yeah.
wherever they are now, and hopefully it's a bit calmer for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never had somebody say to me, I wish I hadn't gone in and seen them, but I've had people say, I wish I had, or if I wish I'd had that opportunity with, a prior death. It's frightening for many people, but after they have that time, they're usually very grateful that they spent it.
That's I feel like that's true too for people who are ailing of health, where some people may shy away
Right.
from seeing them in that state, but then you cherish it, or you cherish that you could potentially be there for them in some way, even if they don't outright acknowledge it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things we do, sort of going along with that, is we allow the families to come in and actually care for their loved ones. So if they want to be the one to bathe them or dress them or
Oh,
do some
wow.
care, it's a gift that they could never, the deceased could never repay, but it's so meaningful. Even, we've had people that have decorated caskets or urns, just some little thing like that, where they're doing something for that person that is just very personal and meaningful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so special. I've never heard anything like that.
Yeah, well, we started this, Wendy Kraft and I, as a second career.
Hmm.
And I really had no background in funeral service, but I kept trying to think of ways we could make it as personal as possible, so that, almost taking it back to before there were funeral homes, like how could we help the family create an experience that's meaningful for them and be there to support them?
Hmm.
And a lot of people take us up on it. Some people are like, no, this, I just want a funeral home to take care of everything.
Hmm.
But those that do help in some way, they never forget that opportunity that they had and that experience.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Well, what were you before? You mentioned this is a second career. What was
I
your
was a
first?
nonprofits. I was an
Okay.
executive director or CEO.
Oh,
Yeah.
very nice. What
And
made you want to make the switch?
part of what I did as a volunteer was I was part of a Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society. And we would go volunteer to help prepare Jews for burial after they passed. And in going into some of the other funeral homes in the area, I just thought there had to be a different way how sometimes I'd go in and I'd see bodies stacked or people just weren't in a way that I would have thought respectful.
Yeah.
The other thing I learned, and Wendy worked for one of the corporate chains at the time, is that a lot of funeral staff are paid on commission and bonuses based on how much they can sell families.
Uh,
So, and most of the families don't know that going in, right? So I was leaving my last job. I had 30 years in nonprofits and just thinking, what did I want to do next in my life? And this just kept popping up that, why don't we try to create a different model for funeral homes?
hmm.
So my staff, nobody gets paid on commission. They actually get a bonus if they get a 5-star review online. We want to make
Ah,
sure
that's wonderful.
families are served and that they, that's the number one concern. So how do we change what we do? I mean, our funeral home doesn't look like a traditional funeral home. We're in a business park. It's all natural colors and we have therapy dogs. We try to make it seem as comfortable as possible for families.
So you have your dogs walking around during a service?
We do, if the
That's
family's
wonderful.
okay with it. We once in a while, and some cultures don't appreciate dogs
Sure,
at a
sure. Yeah.
funeral, but for those that do, or if somebody would come in and we don't have the dogs for whatever reason they were out that day, they're a little disappointed.
I was expecting some dogs. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I
Like,
think that's
where's
wonderful.
Obi? I saw him on the website.
Yeah. Right. That's why I chose you. I wanted to play with the dogs.
Right.
Well, I think that's wonderful. On top of commissions, I mean, I have to say, that feels so, I'll use the word gross, that I
Yeah.
understand that funeral homes are businesses just like anything else, but it feels off, not to judge anyone.
Yeah, it feels wrong. And Wendy and I both felt that that was not how people should be treated at the time of death. I mean, the person sitting across from the table is supposed to be the person that's the expert on this, the person that's supposed to help, counsel, and guide
Hmm.
you. And in the back of their mind, when they're motivated by how much can I upgrade this sale, it just rubbed us, and we just did not want to get involved in that. And that said, I mean, people said, "Oh, you're never going to be, you're never going to survive as a funeral home." Well, we've been in business 12 years now, and we have the highest online reviews of any funeral home in the state.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I agree with you. That is the highest mark. I want to use the term funeral parlor. My grandmother always said that. That
Sure.
may just be a very old timey way of saying it. I keep catching myself from saying that.
That's
But
all
I
right.
think,
That's what those people are familiar with, especially if they come to Vegas and most people are from somewhere else. It's so different here than it is probably, the old places in New York or the
mhm,
Midwest, anywhere else.
yeah. Well, what are some of the other ways your funeral home behaves differently than there's the lack of commissions? It seems like you're painting and decorating in a different way. There are dogs. I'm curious if there's anything else that.
Yeah, so most of the funeral homes in the country are big part of corporate chains, right? There are many significant chains. A lot of them are publicly traded. They're great stocks because they're very profitable. And the way they run their funeral homes, it's almost like an assembly line. So
Mm,
families meet with one person maybe to do their pre-planning and another person after a death, and then somebody else takes care of ordering the death certificate. Somebody else is taking care of getting the body ready. Somebody else is going to be at the service and so on. And we provide what we consider a continuity of care. So if you come in and you meet with one of our staff, that's the person that you're going to meet with throughout the whole
mm,
process. So we work on trying to develop a relationship so they have a sense of trust and know that we have their best interest in mind. And it's a lot easier. You don't have to explain yourself 5 times to different people. You don't go to a service and not know who the funeral staff member is, right?
Hmm.
You go in and you see somebody, and that's the person that you've seen before because you've met with them, and
Yeah.
that we try to create that level of comfort.
I think that's wonderful. As someone who recently has had to deal with the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles and different chains and different people, and that's just for a car, working with the
Right.
same person when the stakes are even higher, we're talking about death. That sounds very comforting.
Yeah. The other thing is we have somebody, a licensed staff member, on call 24 hours a day, which you have in a lot of small towns, but in bigger cities and the corporate chains, you don't always get somebody. If you have a question or somebody passes away, you have to wait till the morning, or Monday to get an answer.
Oh my goodness.
But we have somebody, and it's different in Las Vegas than in most places because our hospitals don't have morgues. So if somebody passes away, the family has to make a decision right away of where they want their loved one to go to be cared for. And if you can't speak to a funeral director, you don't know, you have got questions, you want to make sure that you're comfortable where your loved one is going. So somebody needs to be available.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I can only imagine the stress of having to make such a important decision like that.
Right.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I want to ask you about different kinds of natural burials. I feel like a common one and one that jumps to mind when I reached out to you was I've seen on like 60 Minutes and such of people being buried in pods where a tree would grow. Is that kind of what you would do, or that's not quite?
That is an option.
Hmm.
That's one way people are probably placed in the ground, but usually it's more in either without a casket,
Okay.
just in a shroud or a sheet, or in a natural wooden casket. So we do a lot with pine and poplar,
Hmm.
softwoods. But whatever you place the person in, you want it to be able to be biodegradable so that they can all go back into the earth.
Right.
I mean, there are some body composting, which is legal now, I believe, in Washington State,
Hmm.
where the body is placed in a really highly compostable material or area in the forest, and they'll decompose a lot faster than they would, let's say, in the desert here in Las Vegas.
Yeah. So natural deaths, is it two kinds of people jump out? Is it mostly people who have specific faiths, or and people who like being green or like the idea of not polluting in their final act? Who is the typical customer that you're seeing?
Right. So Islam and Judaism are always their natural burials and green burials were part of the culture thousands of years ago.
Hmm.
So that's the largest percentage. But as more and more people are looking for ways to protect the earth, there are more and more people who have that green consciousness that are exploring natural burials. It's not huge, but we do get calls, once every couple of weeks, but not as often as I would expect,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah, that is
I think a
interesting.
lot of people think of cremation as a natural alternative, a more eco-friendly alternative to burial, but that may or may not be the case depending on the type of cremation.
Right. Well, you mentioned aqua cremation to me
Right.
before we began recording. I'm so curious how that works, and is that an option on your menu? I mean, do you even call like, is menu the wrong word to use?
So we have every funeral home has a general price list.
Uh-huh.
And one of the options on that is we call it aquamation. It's a form of cremation. It's an alkaline hydrolysis cremation. And that uses water and alkaline, potassium and sodium hydroxide is what we use, to break down all the soft tissue of the body and leave behind the bones.
Hmm.
So instead of flame, where the soft tissue is destroyed by flame and leaves the bones behind, we use this water and alkaline. It's a much more gentle process than the flame. It uses 1/10 the energy, so it's much less of a carbon footprint. There's no emissions into the air, and we're able actually to get more of the remains left, up to about 20% more of the remains of the deceased than with flame cremation.
Oh wow, it's that sounds so interesting, and honestly, I want to use the word lovely. It sounds, it seems odd using the word lovely for a term, describing how a dead body is being put back into the world. But I'm not judging anyone for choosing cremated by fire, but that just sounds so much softer and nicer. The idea of being surrounded by water as opposed to flame.
It is. I mean, it's we find that when people know that we have that as an option, about 80% are choosing that over flame cremation.
Hmm.
And from an operator point of view, it's such a more gentle process. Sound-wise, the machine is very quiet. The water circulates with a fan that basically moves the water around like you're in a gentle stream, versus, a loud blast furnace, basically, is what the deceased is put in for flame cremation.
Yeah.
The fact that there's no emissions into the air, there's no smokestack where mercury and different toxins potentially are going into the air, it's really a great alternative.
Yeah.
The process was used by hospitals and medical facilities for medical equipment sterilization. So what happens is after the process, everything is completely sterile. With flame cremation, we would have to remove a pacemaker because of the batteries. With this, it comes out pristine. Artificial joints and pins and stuff, we can send that all to be recycled, returned back into use versus burying it. So it really has a much lower impact on the earth compared to any other option for the disposition of somebody.
That sounds so wonderful. Yeah, sign me up.
Have you ever asked yourself, are your Excel skills optimized for your current job? I mean, what if you're going to get another one? Eventually, you might want another one. Be honest, even if you love your job, you're checking on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, seeing what the salary is at a slightly different job, at a slightly different company. I mean, it's only natural, it's only human. Do you know the basics but would like to learn more? Incoming My Software Tutor. My Software Tutor offers 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. Just start asking the live instructor for a job. Come on, I'm the best in the class. They all deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly, supportive environment. These courses will increase your marketability. You can start looking on Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor with a little more confidence. You got the shiny shoes on. You know Excel a little bit better. You're ready to go. You're ready to get that new job. Whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor, register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. Saving 20% and looking better for that new job. It's a no-brainer. Then we've got Garnished Entertainment. This company started fully virtual. Now as we're getting the vaccines, everyone can get together a bit and video them in. Or if you're in New York or New Jersey, they could come by. Oh man, that sounds so fun. Are you missing your friends? Yeah, invite them over and make cocktails. That sounds so fun. Tired of unwinding in front of the TV? Losing your marbles ever so slightly? I'll shake up your night with a Garnished virtual cocktail event. Garnished Entertainment is a New York City-based mixology event company with the mission of bringing communities together through creative and entertaining virtual cocktail classes. This is an aside, but I went to a cocktail making class in Fort Worth, Texas. And the cocktails were just like straight liquor. We left there feeling pretty good. Feeling so good, in fact, that we were surprised when our Uber driver got pulled over for driving 100 miles an hour. Just didn't even know. That's not great. Whether you're catching up with old friends, team building with colleagues, or looking for the perfect date night, Garnished would love to be your host. Let's garnish. And also, pay attention if your Uber driver's going 100 miles an hour. That's too fast. It's too fast. Okay, let's go right back to the interview.
What is it like working in death? I mean, I would imagine there's a bit of an emotional taxation on you and your staff where you're constantly dealing with people who are heartbroken. That must have been a difficult transition for you to start to deal with that.
Yeah, there were many times when I just thought it was too tough. Emotionally, it's just so hard. But I kept being reminded that if we're here, we can help the family. And
Mm-hmm.
I really focus on helping the family and making the process as smooth and as easy as possible under the circumstances. I mean, anybody can do a cremation or, order a casket for a burial, but being there to support the family and giving them options and not trying to pressure them is what I see as my role.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. It's very important. People who are the family that's still there need help. They need
That's right.
they need an expert that can, not only is the deceased being crossed over some finish line, for lack of a better term, but they also need help to transition from, getting that person to their final resting place to start the grieving process.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah. What would you say working in death has taught you about life? Has it changed your day to day or year to year living?
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate life a lot more.
Yeah.
I see a lot of very tragic deaths. When you see somebody who's in their 90s or 100, it's natural. But when you see children and young people and young parents, it's not the way it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
So I really appreciate what I have and my health and the health of my family. I do a lot of hiking, and I've been doing a lot more since I started doing this, just to get out in nature and center myself. That's, I think, how I stay sane.
I can only imagine. How have things changed with COVID? I mean, I'm sure everything is now heightened as, unfortunately, cases rise and lots of deaths. How has that affected both your business and you and your team's mental state of being?
Well, Vegas has not had the numbers of deaths as other areas of the country, although I think we've had about 1,200 deaths, which is pretty significant. It's scary. I mean, it's when we bring someone into our care who's had COVID, the virus is still in them. So we have to be really careful of how we deal with them and
Hmm.
how we care for them. Even more so, I think, in working with the families who have been exposed to this person, trying to do as much as we can remotely, but then the family, often they need to see their loved one, and we try to make that happen for them if possible. Having services is really tough. It's, they can't get the hugs and the support they need from a large extended group of family and friends. A lot of it is totally done, remotely. It's just it's changed the way of life for funerals, I think, for many years into the future. I mean, so it's good that people that aren't in town can participate in a service, but to have that personal connection and touching people is something
Hmm.
that's totally missed, and it's really hard on families. I'm involved. I happen to be chair of a board of a nonprofit that has a counseling center, and we see a large increase in the number of people who need support because they can't get it like they used to from close family and friends on a day-to-day basis. Just to have physical contact taken away from you is really depressing for many people.
Yeah. Well, although there is no substitute for close, intimate contact like that, are you seeing anything or have any ideas for how people can try to handle that grief in a different way without getting the hugs that they need? Or is it just sort of, we're all in this together and one step at a time?
Well, I think making calls, obviously. I mean, some seniors don't have access to video chats and video conferencing, so that's tough. But just calling people and If you have a neighbor, stop by and drop off, a casserole or something,
Yeah.
and leave it on the front porch and talk from the sidewalk. Just let people know that you're still caring about them. That makes a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious, is there anything do you think I'm missing about natural burials or what about what you do? Anything you think we should discuss?
Well, one thing I think is worth mentioning is that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. In Las Vegas, we don't have any natural cemeteries. We don't have any green cemeteries, which means that they'll allow you to bury without a vault or a liner. But we can create options for people so they can do as much green as possible for the funeral service by choosing not to embalm, using a green casket, using a shroud. And then instead of placing the casket in a vault that has a bottom, ask the cemetery to place the casket directly on the earth and then place the vault over the top. So there's things that people can do even if they don't have full natural burial options in their community.
Yeah, that's good to know. I think it raises the point that I think, if people are interested, they should think about and do some research on what other options could be available to them, right? I feel like a lot of us just kind of accept, I'm going to be buried or I'm going to be cremated. But there's a lot of different options within those, right? You mentioned aqua cremation
Sure.
or, being buried in pine as opposed to a big concrete slab or whatever it is. So I would definitely encourage people to continue to do some research like that. I'm also curious, is embalming, to your knowledge, mandatory in a lot of states in the US? I know you're in
No.
Nevada. It's not.
There's no state that requires embalming.
Okay.
And there may be certain circumstances where it's required if you're going to be holding the body for an extended period of time, but generally embalming is not required. Even to cross state lines, nobody requires that. We've sent bodies to different countries without embalming them. You have to check the regulations, the receiving country, but there are other options. We can enclose the body, and we use something called BioSeal, which basically encloses the body. It's hermetically sealed, and put some gel packs to keep the body cold, and we can send them anywhere. So yeah, I would also encourage people to maybe check out the Green Burial Council. It's a nonprofit that has a lot of resources on green burials and has resources for funeral homes in different states. So if somebody is looking at exploring this option, that's a good resource where they can connect them with somebody locally.
That's great. And what is your website?
Ours is craftsussman.com with a K, KRAFTSUSSMAN.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and take care of yourself.
Thanks, Patrick.
It'd be really tough to think about making your final plans. But number one, it'll help your family out. And number two, if there's something that you end up wanting, you kind of have to have that in place a little bit, or at least discuss it with a family member. And hopefully, through conversations like this, people can find that it's not so difficult to have these conversations, to think about what they want at their end. And it's nice to know that there are ways to help out the earth, to not put on a big carbon footprint as your last act on this earth. It'd be funny if somebody went the other way and had like a Hummer hearse to drive them around. Well, thank you very much for listening. I'd also like to mention my other podcast, That Gives Me Anxiety. It's a show about the things that make us anxious, nervous, scared. And we usually find that through discussing them, most things aren't things that you have to worry about every day, or they may not be as scary as you think. Season 2 of that podcast will be coming soon after Season 2 of Death Space Filling the Void wraps up. As always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Thursday.